Hello. Okay. So this live video is about Varroa mite management in the springtime, and I had to cancel out the live video link and relink it again because there was no sound. Um, so sorry about that. uh, Feel free to send me emails with questions or post them down below in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as I see them later on, after the live video is over. So this video is about Varroa mite management in the spring because it's a little bit different than the rest of the year. The reason why springtime Varroa mite management is a little bit different is because, one, your hive population is smaller. And so with a smaller population comes the inability to be able to take a sampling of 300 bees and put them in alcohol, and therefore they're dying, and not feel like you're going to cause damage to the hive. It's one thing when your hive population is 40, 50,000 bees, but it's another when there's, like 10,000 in the hive. So for one, when it comes to Varroa mite management, the first thing you want to do, whether you put a treatment in or use other techniques, is you want to know what your Varroa mite levels are. Because if you live in a place that has Varroa mites, like North America, Europe, Australia, unfortunately now, you are going to have Varroa mites in your hive. I had a student here in Hawaii that said, my farm is out in the middle of nowhere. It's like 20 acres or 40 acres, whatever it was. There are no Varroa mites. I said, where did you get your bees from? And he said, oh, I do cutouts. And I was like, you do cutouts, in Kona, where there's queen breeders and lots of commercial apiaries. And then you're bringing those bees with the Varroa mites on their back to your very remote location. So unless you live in like Samoa, Kauai, some of these smaller islands that do not have Varroa mites, no matter how remote your area is, there's mites on your bees. The question is, what is your mite level? Because that will tell you whether you need to do something about it. So for one, the first step of your Varroa mite management is knowing what your infestation level is. And I recommend testing one hive in the apiary every month. So springtime comes around. Sorry to you guys that are just coming along. I couldn't get back into the original live video that I had emailed everyone about because it said I ended it. So I had to start a new one. But I will email everyone the link to this video so you can watch it and also post comments down below on YouTube, and I will answer questions as people have them. So the first step to your Varroa mite management, no matter the time of year, is knowing what your levels are, because that will tell you what your next steps should be. So you do a mite test. Now, this is springtime when the hive population is low. So the most effective mite test, where you will get the most accurate results, is with alcohol. Powdered sugar doesn't get you as great results, and there's a lot more potential for error because powdered sugar clumps up. So if there is any water or moisture in any of your equipment, or if when you're shaking a frame, some nectar comes out of the cells, because there's not quite honey yet, that can cause the powdered sugar to clump up. But because this is springtime, and you don't want to kill your bees, you can do the mite test, and instead of using alcohol, you can use powdered sugar. You just want to be really careful. Keep a towel with you so that you can make sure that everything is dry. And then when you get your reading, maybe add just like another, like, increase the number you get, your result, by 1, because that will, you're going to assume that your results aren't going to be as accurate as if you used alcohol. So that's the first step, is to just see what your mite levels are. You don't have to do it for every single hive in your apiary. You just want to do it for one of them, because the thing is that even if one hive is an infestation and the other ones are doing okay, you treat just one hive, the other hives are going to get the infestation. So you usually want to treat every single hive in the apiary unless you've done test after test after test. And one hive always has a mite result of like 0 or 1. Now that hive has just really good genetics and is doing a great job of checking in on the cells and getting rid of the larva or the pupa that has an incredible amount of mites on it that are breeding on there. So unless you have proven that this hive is really great at managing mites on their own, what you're going to need to do is treat every single hive in your apiary. So you do a mite test on just one hive each month, a different hive each month, and you want to know what your results are. Now, if you have a result of 3 or higher, what you want to do is put in a treatment. And you want to treat before the honey is coming in. So most treatments are in your hive for 6 weeks. Plus, you want to give, now this is up to you. If your honey is being consumed by yourself and you're not selling it, it is up to you to decide how strict you want to follow these rules. You know, it's up to you whether you want to wash your produce before you eat it. Like the level of chemicals you want to put in your body is essentially, at your own discretion. But what they recommend is that after the treatment is out of the hive, you want to wait 2 weeks. So if a treatment is in a hive for 6 weeks, talking, like the Apogard, formic acid, Apivar, you want to wait another 2 weeks. So that is 8 weeks. It's almost 2 full months that you have your treatment window. So if your honey is starting to really come in the summertime, say June, you want your treatment in well before that and out before June comes around. So this is where it's helpful to either talk to other beekeepers or to just pay attention to your environment and your surroundings and to know when the flowers are really starting to bloom. It's not the end of the world if you still have a treatment in when the bees are bringing in honey. It's just once you take that treatment out, you want to, what I do is I take a Sharpie marker, my frames are wooden, and I just put a dot and a large uppercase P on the top of the frame. And that lets me know that these frames of honey were in the hive when a treatment was in. I do that to the frames that also just have drawn out comb on them that maybe the bees didn't fill up. And I harvest comb honey, so people are eating the wax along with the honey. So it's even more important for me to make sure that I am not exposing people to these chemicals. Beeswax is very porous, so it is going to absorb the chemicals in the treatment. So when you're putting a treatment in, you want to put it in not too late. Is there a time when it's too early to put in a treatment? As long as it's warm enough, daily for the bees to be coming and going, it's like at least 65 Fahrenheit out. I don't think it's cold and I don't think it's like, too early. Now, if you buy your bees and you just bring a nuke to the apiary, that's when it's helpful to ask the place you're buying them from if they treated for mites before they sold the package, because you don't want to expose your bees to too many treatments. So if they just, fumigated their hives with oxalic acid a month prior, you don't want to be then also exposing them to more treatments. So that's where doing a mite test comes in handy. Unless you have a really high mite level and it's at least 3 or 4, then you can forego the treatment. The thing is that when you buy bees, the apiaries aren't always giving you healthy bees. I don't know. I think people have this like idea that if you're a beekeeper, you're like a good person, like a steward of the environment of the earth, and you care so much. But apiaries are businesses, And maybe the business was originally started because they loved bees, but when it comes down to it, they're hiring employees, they're working hard, they're outside, and they're just doing things really fast. If you were working as slowly as a hobby beekeeper does and running a commercial apiary, you would be bankrupt. You would not get anywhere near enough work done. And I'm saying this as somebody that worked for a commercial apiary for 7 years, and I've talked to lots of beekeepers that worked for the commercial queen breeders. It's you don't work for those apiaries because you love beekeeping. If you love beekeeping as a hobby beekeeper, the worst thing you could do is get a job working for these apiaries, because it will make you really sad to see how bees are just thrown really fast and all that stuff. Um, so I get a little bit off topic, but when it comes down to it, you just want to. Someone wants to know how much extra hive equipment would be good to keep on hand. It depends. Do you want to build your apiary, or are you looking to keep the amount of hives you have? Because if you want to keep building your apiary, you want to have as much equipment as you need for each hive, so that when your hives get full and the population's high and you want to prevent them from swarming, that's when you split them. You usually want 2 deeps for your brood, plus another 2 to 3 supers for honey. You might not need that, but it kind of depends on your location and how much honey they can bring in. You want to save yourself time and only harvest honey once a year. You're going to want some extra supers, like 3. If you are okay with doing 2 harvests, you can have just like 2 supers on your hive. You want 1 super of honey for your winter harvest, and then you have your other super for the bees to bring in honey for you to have. And then once that box is full, you harvest it and you put it back on and let the bees bring in more honey. So it's up to you whether you would rather save time and have more supers, or save the money on the equipment and harvest a little bit more. Um, I personally just bought a table saw and learned how to make boxes. And I buy frames in packs of 100. So I just have a whole bunch of frames on hand that I can build really fast. And the boxes, I just buy some wood. And, when you're going to make a box, you better make like 5 or 10 at a time at the very least if you're going to set everything up, because it doesn't take much longer to do 5 boxes versus 1 box. And I have some extra lids on hand in a pinch. And when I say lids, I don't mean like nice lids to overwinter a hive with a telescoping outer cover and the aluminum top. I'm talking about like 3/4 inch plywood that's cut down to the size of your box, that I can use as a lid or a bottom board in a pinch. Just make sure you have a 3/4 inch hole drilled into your deep boxes so your bees have an entrance exit in them. And those are, spare things if you need to split a hive like at the last minute and stuff. But if you're not looking to split hives and expand your apiary, then what you want is like um one of those things. It kind of looks like a bottom, but it has these slats in it, and then it has a space below, and that helps to prevent bees from swarming without having to pull brood frames out and split hives. So you don't have to expand your apiary and need more equipment. Someone's saying I'm going to buy bee frames to start. How many frames is enough? Well, if you're having a 10 frame box, which is the standard, then you want 10 frames for each box. So for a hive, you want, two deep boxes, which is 20 frames of deep frames, and then 20 frames of super frames. Or you can do 30 frames if you think your bees are going to bring in that much honey, and want that extra little bit. So that would be 20 deep frames plus 20 or 30 shallow frames. So back to your Varroa mite management. First, you want to do a mite test once a month. I recommend doing that with powdered sugar. You can put a sticky board under your hive. I hate them. I think they are really hard to get accurate results. You have to remember to take it out. You don't want it in there too long. You have to count every tiny little speck. It's annoying. So I recommend the powdered sugar. I talked to a guy from Scientific Beekeeping. He said that they actually marked their bees, did a powdered sugar mite test, put them back in the hive, and the bees that they had done in the powdered sugar test actually did survive. So it did seem a lot like a lot of jostling, and that bees might not survive that kind of thing, but they actually did. So a powdered sugar test is just fine to get an accurate mite result. And then if your mite results are 3 or higher, I could recommend putting in a treatment before 2 months before your big honey season starts. Now, it's usually summertime, like June-ish. You want most treatments are going to be in the hive for 6 weeks, plus you want to leave another 2 weeks. So you want to put it in early, not long after you get your bees, if necessary. And also ask the place, if you're just buying your bees, ask them if they already treated for mites. Because if they did, then you probably don't want to expose them to more chemicals. You put your treatment in and the honey's starting to come in and your treatment's still in, I would leave the treatment in, go through the full treatment, follow the directions. When the treatment comes out, wait a couple weeks, and then just mark the frames that were in there with honey on them and drawn out comb, because you don't want to use that for harvesting. Or you could take those frames out and put them in a freezer or refrigerator and give them back to the bees in the fall when your harvest is over and they're bringing in fall honey, because that's what's going to take them through the winter. That's what they're going to be eating. So it's okay that you give that back to the bees. Now, as far as what to do, like treatments are concerned, to bring your mite levels down, this time of year, the queen is just starting to lay, and so the bees, she's using pheromones to communicate with the hive. So I don't really recommend using formic acid. It's can cause queen loss, and the smell is very strong, so it can cause a lot of damage and really slow down the hive. Uh, so I usually will recommend to people Apivar, Apiguard. Just make sure you're following the directions, because like the Apiguard is uses like a thyme oil, a thymol based. It is not considered organic in the United States, but I think it is in Europe. And it is sensitive to heat. So if it's already starting to get above, like, I think it's like 80 or 85, especially if your hives are out in full sun, it can cause the bees to abscond, which means that they all take off and leave. So just check the directions and make sure that you're not using something that's not appropriate for the temperature in your area at that moment. You can use oxalic acid, which is an organic treatment, but that's something I recommend in the fall when there's little to no brood present, and you don't want to use the same treatment every single time you treat. So if you're already using that as your fall treatment, then try using something else instead. There is that I forget what it's called, but that thermal heat plate that you put in the hive, which is supposed to be very effective and great and kills the mites and does not harm the bees or the brood. However, the last I had heard, they were still not producing anymore. You can find some people on Facebook selling theirs, some Facebook groups for that product. There are people selling theirs that no longer keep bees, so you can always try that. Oh yeah, someone Sam says a Mighty Mite. I haven't used it personally because I just can't. It's a little bit too expensive of a product for me to try, because my beehives are not at my home. They are on other people's farms, and it needs to be in the hive, I think, for at least like 6 hours or so. And so I just can't run power out to there or sit there, for that. But oxalic acid, is an option. Just make sure you just don't use it every single time. It is organic, and I believe you can consume the honey. I don't. I get freaked out about selling or consuming honey when anything is put into the hive. So I like to be especially cautious. And it also depends on where you're getting your oxalic acid from. But I believe, depending on that acid you're using, because some people just go to the local hardware store and buy wood bleach. You might be able to consume the honey afterwards, but just check with the product you're buying. And I use the vaporizer. I don't use the dribble method. That's a little bit too, I don't know, it's just unnecessary and a little bit too messy. I used the vaporizer. I bought it off of Daydance website, and just got like a motorcycle battery and used that as power out to the hives. And in addition to that, if you don't want to treat before the summertime comes around, or you just didn't, for whatever reason, you didn't know you were supposed to, you don't have to. You just want to keep an eye on your mite levels. Once your mite level, using, like doing a mite test with alcohol, you're rubbing alcohol, once your mite level is over 7, that's when the mites are at a level that's so high that they're going to be bringing in an excessive amount of viruses, because that's ultimately the problem. And they're not just affecting some of the pupating bees, but they're bringing in a lot of viruses. There are ways to try to keep your mite levels down. One of them is by freezing your drone comb. So drones take the longest to pupate, therefore, and over 95% of the mites in your hive are on the pupating bees, procreating, laying eggs, having babies. Babies are having babies with their brothers and sisters and all that stuff. So if you use foundation, make sure you have drone foundation, and put at least 2 frames of drone foundation in your hive so that the bees can build drone comb and make drones. If you don't use foundation, great. Whenever you see drone comb and the cells are already capped, because you want to make sure that they're pupating now, you take that out and you freeze it to kill the mites. And then you can either melt it down and use that wax for whatever, or you can give it back to the bees and let the bees clean it out. And that will help bring down your mite levels. In addition to that, one great way to help bring down your mite levels is to use smaller cells. So if you don't use foundation, then the bees might already be building. You'll see that your cells are all different sizes for your worker bees. And so they say that the smaller the cell, the shorter the amount of time for pupation, and therefore the less time it takes the bees to hatch, and therefore the fewer amount of days that the mites have to have their babies. I talked to Michael Bush, which is he's a very well-known beekeeper, wrote a lot of books about natural beekeeping, and he says that what he does is he shaves down his wooden frames so that he fits 11 frames in a 10-frame box, does not use any foundation, and the bees build much smaller cells, and then he freezes that drone comb and also the smaller cell size. He does not use treatments, and that is the main method that he goes treatment free. In addition to the fact that some of his bees just die over winter, and those are the bees that do not manage mites well on their own, and so they're the ones that are going to perish. And the ones with the inclination, the tendencies to deal with mites better, survive over winter, and they're the ones that stay and that he breeds from. So one person said that in their country they're using amatraz tape, and there's studies that it causes cancer. Amatraz is also the chemical in Apivar, and those strips are really super easy to use. But yeah, Amatraz does freak me out. And I mean, it's still very effective to managing mites if you don't overuse it. You really want to be careful, as a lot of areas, mites have become resistant to Amatraz. So you really want to check your mite levels after you've used it to make sure it did something. But super easy to use, can be really effective, but definitely don't use it more than once a year. And you really need to be careful with, like, once it's out, give it a couple weeks. Either take out those frames that have even just drawn out comb on them that the bees were going to fill up with honey, take out all the honey frames, or mark them and don't use them for harvest. Leave them for the bees to eat, because Amatraz is a very harsh chemical that you do not want to be ingesting. So yeah, I don't think it's really ever too early to treat for mites if you want to do a springtime treatment, as long as it's warm enough for the bees to be coming and going in the daytime, and you're following the directions, and the directions for whatever treatment you're using, you know, say that you can use it at the temperatures that it is in your environment. As far as it being too late, it's never too late. It's just the bees might be bringing in honey, and that honey is going to be affected by the treatment. So that's just honey you're going to want to store and leave for the bees for the winter, and not the honey you're going to want to harvest, which isn't the end of the world, because you need to leave a lot of honey for your bees over winter. So just leave that as one of those frames and harvest the honey that the bees bring in a month from then. And if you don't want to treat, you just want to keep an eye on your mite levels. You want to continue to freeze the drone comb to get rid of mites that are in those pupating bees. And there's lots of methods you can try. I found that putting powdered sugar on frames and stuff like that does not do much, but there's lots of alternative methods. I just think that the going foundationless can help a lot with your mite management when it comes to your brood, and see how it goes. If your mite level is getting up above like 5, 6, 7, that's when you really should just say, I don't, whatever honey is in the hive, you can harvest some, you can take it out and put it in a freezer or refrigerator, and just put in a treatment before your levels get so high that the viruses can really just like wipe out a hive. And there's a potential, once your level is like over 7, there's a potential for the bees to not be able to bounce back from that. And then summertime is going to come. So that's when you want to ease off on putting any of those things in the hive. You still manage your mite levels. You still want to know what they are. After you put in a treatment, you want to do another test in a few weeks once the treatment's out, to see if the treatment worked, to see how the levels are increasing over the course of the summer, and to see if you even need to treat come next year, because that's overall the goal, is to get some hives with the genetics that they're opening up some of those pupating bee cells and pulling out those bees that are infected and getting rid of some of those mites and cleaning each other and being more hygienic. I don't think foundation, one person asked, does foundation encourage mite production? I mean, I can't say for sure. I am a beekeeper, not an entomologist, so I haven't done thorough research, but I don't believe that foundation encourages mite production. I just believe that when you don't use foundation, bees build the cell sizes in a variety of sizes. I mean, that is a fact. If you see honeycomb built out without foundation, you'll see that the cells vary in size quite a bit from cell to cell, not just, workers versus drone cells, but even among the worker bees. And so some of those smaller cells mean that the bees hatch faster because they're smaller, and that's less time that the mites have to procreate and to feed off of those bees in those pupating cells. So that's why some beekeepers choose to not use foundation. Personally, I only treat once a year. It is in usually end of January, early February. before the honey season starts. And some of you might be saying, oh, she lives in Hawaii, so yeah, it's easy for her. But when it comes to wintertime, yes, we don't have a frost down where my hives are, but we have, I mean, nobody knows pests like people in warm climates, because with a frost comes the death of bees and the death of a lot of other insects. So small hive beetle, wax moth, varroa mites, not only are bees dying, but all of those pests are dying with the bees. But here in Hawaii, the levels get to be insane. Nobody knows pest management like people that do not have a frost, or cockroaches for that matter. It's we have small hive beetle and varroa mite levels that are through the roof, and so I don't use foundation in my hives. I freeze drone comb as needed. I let the bees build as much drone comb as they want to. It's not good for honey production. It's not good for when I'm trying to sell nukes, but I believe it is good for the health of the bees, because I let them decide how many drones they need in the hive. And some of those drones are being made for reproduction, but it's very possible that some of those drones are being made as a trap for the varroa mites. And I help them out with that. And when they are trapping those varroa mites in drone comb and they're making 4 frames of drone comb, I pull that drone comb out, because I take it as a way that they're telling me there's a lot of mites here and we're trying to trap them with this. One person asked if I use something in my smokers for Varroa treatment. I do not. I do harvest a lot of comb honey. And so there's a lot of beekeepers here. There's a lot of honey production. And so the way I was able to get started selling my honey in a very oversaturated market here, especially with an island, we're very limited in how many stores you can sell to. It's, this, you drive around the whole thing in like 5 hours. So there's only so many supermarkets you're going to come in contact with. I do comb honey, and beeswax is very porous. So you have to use like very little smoke. I very rarely even use smoke when opening my hives, and I use very little smoke when harvesting honey, because I just don't want to make the comb taste smoky. So let me see. Anybody else have any questions? I'm going to check to see. Okay, so check to see what other topics I was going to address. So that's what I do for the springtime management, and what I recommend to people, especially if you're buying your bees, to check what the mite levels are using powdered sugar, or you can use a sticky board. And then lay off in the summertime, let the bees bring in honey, let the hive build, the population increase, give them as much room as you can. Make sure there's ample room in your brood, not just empty supers on tops to prevent swarming. And then once you are harvesting your honey, you're seeing that production's coming down. And the way to see that is once a week or once every week, do an inspection. I have on my website, in the blog, inspection sheet you can fill out, or just like look through and put a tick for every single time you see a full frame of honey. I usually do like a half a tick mark for a half a frame. And you don't have to pull every single frame out of your boxes. You can just like look down into those honey supers and just kind of get an idea for how many are empty. And once you're seeing like every couple of weeks they're filling up another couple frames, and then it stops and it slows down quite a bit, that lets you know that the honey season is coming to an end, usually at the end of the summer. And then that's when you would be harvesting the excess, and that's when you do another mite treatment. Now, this is the most important time to treat, and often a cause for why hives die over winter, which is because this is when the queen bee is going to start laying her eggs for the winter bees. Winter bees are different than the bees the rest of the year. They will be the bees that carry the hive through the winter. They survive a lot longer. They have more fat on their body. They're just different than the rest of the bees. So she lays those eggs like around the late summer, and you want there to be very low mite levels, because if those mites get in on those winter bees when they're pupating, they're going to be feeding off of them. They're going to hatch with viruses. They're going to hatch with deformed wings, all kinds of issues, or they're not going to hatch at all. And they are not going to be strong enough to properly form a cluster. And you're going to find that your bees die very early on in the winter. And that is because they're just not clustering up to produce enough heat for the queen and the rest of the bees during those first few cold nights that you get. So you really want your winter bees healthy. So then you put in a treatment after you harvest your honey, and then you want to treat one more time before you close up the hive for winter. Now, like I said, if you are testing your hives month after month and you have a hive that is coming up with a mite level of 0 or 1 consistently, month after month, that is a hive that has great genetics. It is a hive you want to continue to breed from and split. And that is a hive that is dealing with mites very well on their own. So that is not a hive you need to put treatments into. But until your hives are at that level that they have a 0 or a 1, especially come the fall, late summer, and winter, you do want to do something to bring your varroa mite levels low, or the likelihood that your hive is going to survive the winter is pretty low. One asked if the island of Molokai doesn't have Varroa. Probably not. I don't know any beekeepers on Molokai. Kauai, I do have a student on Kauai. He does not have Varroa mites. So I would assume that Molokai wouldn't either, because they have even fewer beekeepers than Kauai. The Oahu, the Big Island, I don't know about Maui. I know Maui has the small hive beetle. When I was visiting, they had the hive beetle, and that was about 10 years ago. I don't know if Maui has the varroa mites, probably, but hopefully not. And then Walter asked what my standard beehive configuration is. Me personally, I do the Hawaii way that I was taught, and the way I prefer, because I don't have much upper body strength, and that is one deep box, because you don't have to pick it up almost ever, and it's all brood. So the first box in my hive is deep, and the rest are all supers. So the second box that's a super is also going to have brood in it, and then the box is up like half brood, half honey, and the boxes up above that are all honey. Personally, if I did it that way because that's the way they do it at the farms I worked for. Most people's configurations are 2 deeps and then all supers, which is helpful because when you're swapping brood around, all your brood frames are deeps, and that makes it easier. But it also just makes that box really heavy. So if you're not so inclined to lift something up that is 50 pounds or more, then I wouldn't go with that configuration. I got a bunch of equipment for free from the place I was working for and other random people that found boxes on their farm. But if I was to buy all of my equipment or build it and didn't have anything, I would just do all mediums. No deeps, no shallows, all mediums. That doesn't mean that your honey boxes are going to weigh a little bit more, because like a shallow box when totally full of honey is like roughly 35 pounds, give or take. But medium boxes, and then you can just swap frames everywhere. You don't need 2 different sized frames. And I think it is so much easier than having to deal with different sized frames and swapping things around. And he asked if I use a screen bottom or a solid bottom. I use the beetle traps on half of my hives have beetle traps on them, which is a plastic screen, not like wire screen, a plastic screen with the pan with oil below it. And that's for small hive beetle management. And that is on the hives that are in the really wet areas, super rainy, and small hive beetles populations are really high. The rest of my hives have flat bottoms. I've tried screen bottoms, and the places I worked for always used just a solid bottom. And I found that the screened bottoms, my hives had mold inside them. So I never found that it helped. I mean, in some of the areas it does get really hot, but I found that it does not help with anything. It causes more harm, and it also probably allows the small hive beetles extra spaces that they can get up into the hive. They do say that, like, if you have a screen bottom, when the bees are cleaning themselves and the varroa mite falls off of them, it could potentially fall through the holes of the screen bottom and is better for varroa mite management. But I put the oil pans below, and that helps with all of that pest management. They're just a little pricey, and in this kind of climate, plastic breaks a lot faster, so you have to keep replacing them. Woodenware is obviously the ideal kind of equipment, but um, yeah, I go with neither. If given the option, I go with this oil pan for the small hive beetles. And no, I do not mark my queens. I I think it's good for the beekeeper to your first year. It's great to have a marked queen. It can help out a lot. And in some situations, it's helpful to know that you have a marked queen. So if you think your hive might have swarmed, your population might be incredibly low all of a sudden, but there's eggs and a queen walking around. If she had a dot on her back, you know if it was your original queen or a new one. But I think it's good for the beekeeper to get to know how to spot their queen without a dot on her back. Because if your hive ever does swarm and they make a new queen on their own, or you want to try queen breeding on your own, it's really good to be able to spot her without depending on that dot on her back. And I'm also just pretty lazy when it comes to things that are not required. Like, you can mark your queen, but if I don't have to and it's not really making my life much easier, I don't. I did try putting nail polish. I worked for this farm, and we were doing tours and opening up a beehive and showing people the bees. And so, it's like 90 degrees outside. The sun's beating on me. I have 20 people staring at me, asking me questions. I'm supposed to be opening a beehive with just a veil, t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers, sometimes flip-flops. I wasn't allowed to wear protective gear beyond the veil. So I'm opening the hive, doing a 45-minute talk and talking to people about bees, all the while still trying to find the queen so I can point her out to people. So I begged my boss to buy some pen so that I could just mark her so it would be easier to spot her while doing this tour, and so people could see her when I'm pointing to her through the screen. They refused, so I used nail polish. Um, Nail polish worked okay. It stayed on the queen, and it did not kill her, but a little bit harder to hold a queen down and also manage a bottle of nail polish with a brush. So I don't recommend nail polish unless you really don't want to buy your pen for your queens. Um, Walter wants to know. Walter, you have a lot of questions. They're good questions. Walter wants to know if we have European bees or local bees. Well, the only endemic bee is the yellow-faced bee, which is a tiny little yellow and black bee at the Hawaiian Islands. I don't think there are any other endemic bees. We have European bees. They brought Italian and German bees over. I don't believe any carnelian or Russian bees were ever brought over, but there are, some of the biggest queen breeding operations. Oliveras is here. They brought Big Island queens, and we have Kona queens. and a ton of small queen breeding operations here in Kona. And I know that they do let their bees, you know, do their thing on their own, but I believe they do artificially inseminate as well. So I never really got a straight answer from the people that worked for the queen breeding places or any of the other beekeepers as to whether they brought over genetics other than Italian and German. But I've just seen, the typical yellow with black striped bees and the tan and black bees here, which look very much like the Italian and German bees. One person wants to know if Africanized bees are more challenging to treat for Varroa mites. They're in the Caribbean. Are there Africanized bees in the Caribbean? Hopefully not. They sometimes get a scare when they find a swarm in like a container or something that arrives in Hawaii, and the bees are excessively aggressive. But so far, they aren't here on the Hawaiian Islands. So I haven't directly dealt with Africanized bees. I did do a podcast episode with a beekeeper from Texas, and talked to him about his experience. But from what I have heard, everything is more difficult with Africanized bees. I mean, they're more aggressive, so putting any kind of treatment in is going to be more difficult. And then if you use treatments that use a strong smell, like Apogard or formic acid, I believe Africanized bees are a lot more, tend to swarm a lot more. And so I would think that there's a much greater chance of swarming from those bees, but that's just an assumption. I would definitely talk to somebody from Texas or beekeepers that have dealt with Africanized bees more if you're concerned about that. But I don't know if I would continue to keep bees if we had Africanized bees here, because if I got used to just wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and sometimes wearing a suit if the mosquitoes are bad. But if I opened a hive and the bees were so aggressive towards me, that would just break my heart to have such a relationship with them. I recently got into a new hobby. A friend of mine has a loom, and she weaves, and she gave me her old loom. And so I signed up for an online class to learn how to weave. I'd already taken an in-person class, but then I forgot everything. And it really reminded me of beekeeping classes. I did in-person beekeeping classes, and now I do online classes for the same reason, because I found my students forget, how to do things. And someone was talking about weaving and why they do it, and it was very similar to beekeeping for me. I hear a lot about people saying they want to keep bees because they want to help them, and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think the people that really get into it and do it for a long time are the people that just love it. They just love the action of being out there. They love being around the bees. And you find that the more you do it, the less it is about the gadgets and what you're buying and the exact time to do things and measurements and all that stuff, and more about just a communication you have with them. Like, you really just start to communicate in some way with them, however that might be. Maybe you're talking out loud to them, or thinking things, or with your actions, or whatever it might be. But that really is just like how the flow starts to happen. So that's why it can get kind of complicated explaining things, because you really can't explain intuition or how you're going to find your own groove with them. Oh, Ian says that they do have a lot of Africanized bees in the Caribbean. What a shame. Sorry to hear that, Ian. I would definitely reach out to beekeepers in the southern states about that. I really hope that they never come here to Hawaii. They talked about trying to breed Africanized bees here, and I hope the queen breeders never try that. That sounds like a terrible idea. How another question, how do you control ants from bee colonies? I do have a YouTube video about probably in the pest management uh, playlist about like the top things you don't want to see in your hive, what to do if you see them and how to prevent them. And one thing I talk about is ants, and I add that in the end because most of the time ants are not a problem. It seems like a lot of people, I have a lot of students ask me about ants, like what to do because they see ants in the hive. And most of the time you don't have to do anything. There's just going to be ants in the hive. It's like someone asking me, what do you do if you see cockroaches in your house in Hawaii? It's like, I don't know, you can either escort it out of your house or squish it or leave it alone. Like they're just always going to be there. They're trying to find food, and that's what ants are doing most of the time, is they're just trying to steal some food. I've actually very often will see ants in the wetter areas. I will find a lot of ants like under my hives. If I'm pulling off a bottom board, I'll find a lot under there, or actually even sometimes in the boxes. Termites are pretty bad out here too, and so I'll find like them just like scurrying with like eggs on their back running around. And I've never experienced ants harming a hive. Even when a colony like that has eggs, like in the woodenware that a colony is also in. I know there are some species of ants that can kill a beehive, but it's just not common. So most of the time, if you do see ants, it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. If you do suspect that it is becoming a problem, I forget, it's in a video where you can do, I believe, like cinnamon can deter them. I mean, some of these things, it's just going to wash away. You have to keep putting it down. So you also run the risk of also annoying your bees more so than the ants were. But in that case, you can use Google goggles or some other apps to try to identify the kind of ant you're seeing, and then that will help you better figure out what to do about them. But I've seen lots of pretty large ants crawling around in my hives, and they've never done any damage. One person asked if I use green drone comb. I don't use foundation. I let the bees build as much drone comb as they want to. But if you do use foundation, I highly recommend buying some of the green drone comb and letting the bees build as many drones as they want to, especially if your mite levels are high. Because, well, I mean, if they aren't, then you don't really have to worry about it. But if your mite levels are starting to creep above like 5, then throw in a lot of drone comb and let your bees build some drones so that you can freeze them when they're in the pupation stage. One person said they used 2 drone comb frames for every 10 last year and the bees didn't touch it. Well, I mean, that's not really terrible. If that does happen, you can, just replace it with regular comb. I guess they just didn't want to, just don't like guys. They didn't really want to make any males at the time. If there is not an excess of honey, they're not going to make drones because drones are essentially depleting their reserves. So they're not going to make them unless they can, or have some need for them. They don't just make them, like they're not always going to make them. One person said they have a new package on new foundation to start trading. I don't quite understand what the question is. One person said they get a lot of paper wasps because they like to eat bees. They use wasp catchers. Any other ideas? Yeah, wasps. Wasps are another story. They can kill a hive, especially the problem with wasps is going to be the fall when you, or whenever there's, just a dearth, which is a lack of food, a lack of flowers blooming, which is usually late summer, early fall, but also, if there's a drought or something. Um, there's not a ton you can do. Wasp traps can help. Um, really, the only thing that I'm aware of to do about wasps is the prevention, which is never leave honey or comb or equipment, used equipment that's not in a hive, just out around your bees. It's really easy when you're just like, scraping out the drone comb or burr comb to just throw it down on the side. But or any kind of honey falls off. But it's really helpful to pick that up. And dispose of it somewhere else, because anything outside the hive is really going to attract wasps, and you don't want the wasps to catch on to where your beehives are. um, I never put all of, like, even when I just had a few hives, I always split up my hives, assuming you have it at least two or three. I always put my hives in two different areas, even if it was on the same property, but two different parts of the property. It's always helpful to do that, because if you just have like a ton of robbing or wasps attacking your hive, it's always good if you have hives somewhere else that the wasps don't know about. And that comes to feeders too. A lot of people will put like a chicken feeder or some kind of feeder outside the hive, on top of the hive, and you're not just feeding your bees, you're feeding anything that wants some nectar, and you're attracting these things. So when a drought comes and there's not a lot of food, these insects are going to come back to where the feeder was. They're not, even if those insects still aren't alive, they pass this information down. You're they're still going to remember this location. And so you just don't want to tip off. You want to keep your beehive location hidden, essentially, from all of these other pollinators. And that's also, just like when you're out with the bees and you have the hive open, it's fun to open the hive, but to leave frames out everywhere and to be out there for like 3 hours, that's just more time to let wasps know what's going on and for them to find your bees. Um, I mean, one possible thing to do if like wasps are really out of control and really getting to your bees is to move them. People say you want to move them at least a mile. I found that that is totally not the case. I have moved them like 20 feet away. You really just, you want to do it at nighttime so that you don't lose too many bees, and then put something in front of the entrance, just like a branch with some leaves or something. This is the way for the bees to know that they are in a new spot and they have to reorientate themselves. That's all they really need, is to know that something has changed, and that, they need to change too. And that will also then, can help with the wasp problem. Um, One person said if I have a recipe for lip balm and how you mix it. I've never really made lip balm. I don't use it. It's, not very dry here, but there's a ton online. The thing about, I mean, I do make a face lotion and a body lotion with it. It's a very minimum amount of beeswax, a lot of coconut oil. I use avocado oil. Um, and like just a teensy little bit of beeswax. There's a ton of them online. I really don't have any specific recipes off the top of my head. But what I do is I have a little hot plate that I have outside, and I have a shed and I have just like a folding table, and I put the hot plate with an old pot full of water, and then I have a large glass jar, and this is just like personal usage. I'm not like doing large quantities. And then I will put my son over I will put the beeswax in there first so that can melt, and then I'll put the other softer oils in after that. You just want to create a double boiler essentially. So you put the jar in the pot of water, and you don't want to put it directly over the heat. And once everything's melted, then I'll pour it into the jars and let it sit and not touch it. And that's usually enough so that um, everything melts. And you want to do this when it's just warm, like in your house, or in my case, I can do it outside because it's a warm climate. You don't want to do it when it's like nighttime and it's like in your garage and 50 degrees outside, because then the beeswax can start to harden and it will separate from your oils. So you just want to make sure that it's warm enough out that everything like cools down together and doesn't start to separate. One person said they have a new package on new foundation. When to start treating for mites, or do I have mites at all? Well, that's the question. So, you do have mites, yes. The question is like, what is your level of mites? So if you have at least, you want to do a test, you can do a test with powdered sugar. I have a video on my YouTube channel about testing for mites using alcohol. And what you're going to want to do is use powdered sugar instead. So you can either find another video with powdered sugar, or you can just do that same test but with powdered sugar instead of rubbing alcohol. And you want to see what your mite level is. So if you have a mite level of 3 or higher, I would recommend treating for mites before, ideally 2 months before your big honey season starts, which most likely is probably like as soon as possible. You would put the treatment in. If you don't want to do your mite test, or I don't know, you just don't feel like it, you can just put a treatment in this one time just to make sure your bees are healthy so that you don't have to deal with any kind of infestation come the summer. Or you can just play it out and see how it goes and freeze drone comb and hope that you don't have to put a treatment in when the honey's coming in. In worst case scenario, you don't put a treatment in, you just might be tainting your honey with chemicals if you put a treatment in later on when an infestation starts to come. If you have no comb in your hive, like you just put a package of bees in and there's like, not much, I would first ask whoever you bought your bees from if they treated for mites before, like the springtime in the last couple of months, or ask them what the last time they treated and what their treatment method was. Because if they did just treat in the last couple of months, you shouldn't have to do anything. You shouldn't have to treat a package of bees that's literally just like 10,000 bees hanging out in your hive just starting to build like a teeny bit of comb. That is not something you should have to do. Your bees should have some kind of treatment. And if they say they don't use any kind of treatment, you can just wait it out and see what happens and see how they do. And if they start to struggle, you can put one apivar strip in. But I wouldn't just immediately stick an apivar strip into a package of bees. For one, it's kind of a waste of apivar because, it's like a $30 package. You're just using one tiny little strip. It's also a lot to already give these bees a chemical while they're just starting to build up. It might not cause any harm, but it seems like it's an unnecessary thing to start off with immediately. I just give them a little bit of time. It's kind of like a friend of mine, every time her son, who is, a baby, he's just like 12 months old, every time he just like has a rough night or like wakes up in the middle of the night, she immediately gives him Tylenol. And I'm like, I'm more on the side of, I wait, I see what's wrong. I put them back to sleep. I see if like they're waking up in another 4 hours. I see if like they're still, I don't immediately go to giving bees a treatment without knowing if it's necessary. So I would hold off on it until now. if you're looking at your bees and you see a mite on the back of a bee, then yeah, put in a treatment, because that's not good. Because most of the mites are hanging out on their underside between the segments. So if you're seeing a mite on a bee, that's no good. Or you can also get a sticky board. And in that case, a sticky board is really like the best way to see what your mite levels are. Just put that under the hive and see if you catch any mites and how many you find under there. But first, I would go to the farm you bought your bees from and ask them what their deal is, and hope that they're giving you an honest answer, because they already sold you the bees. So I don't really think they have a reason to lie to you about what their treatment methods were. But yeah, I do have a lot of students that right off the bat do not want to treat. They want to see how it goes. And that was exactly what I said when I was starting out. I don't want to immediately think there's a problem without there being a problem. A sticky board is a single use item. You can make a sticky board, uh, like spray or put like Crisco or something on the board. I would just buy one. I tried making everything. It always ends up being a lot of pain in the butt, not like physical pain, sometimes physical pain. And then I end up spending just as much money because I had to buy a huge tub of Crisco for like a tablespoon's worth. And it doesn't work as well. So I would buy the sticky boards that are super sticky and follow the directions that they give you on that, because there's only a certain amount of time they're supposed to have the board in there. Yeah, some people spray Pam. I don't remember what I did. It was years ago, or at least 5 years ago, and it did not work well. So, um, I would buy a sticky board if you can. I think it's a little bit more effective. So if anyone has any other questions, let me know. I'm sorry for the change of location for the stream. Some issues with sound for some reason. And you can always post a question later. I might not see it, but I might see it. I just get a lot of comments on that stupid video I made years ago about the flow hive. And so I started to just ignore comments on my YouTube channel so that I didn't, because they were mostly about that flow hive and it was driving me crazy. Best of luck with your bees. Don't forget, bees are self-sufficient. They've been around much longer than we have. They deal with most stresses all on their own. The main stress that we have to help them out with, because they have not been dealing with, is Varroa mites, cold, drought, wasps. They evolved with these things, but unfortunately, the Varroa mite has now, and small hive beetle and some of those pests have it spread around the world. So that's really one of the things we want to be a little bit more proactive about. The other things, I think it's really important to take a step back and to listen to the bees and to see what they're doing and to follow what they're already doing and to see how you can help them, as opposed to trying to force things on your colony. Is a mice sticky board okay? I have no idea. The only thing I would check out is to make sure there's just no chemicals added, no scent to that glue. I think those mice sticky boards are like super, super sticky. So you just might want to make sure it's not going to like stick to something in your hive while putting it in and like, be stuck there for a long time when you're sliding it in and stuff like that. And make sure there's no chemicals or strong smell on the sticky board or in the glue. Yeah, I try to go live the first Friday of every month which was supposed to be last week, but it was Good Friday, and so I didn't realize until it was a little bit too late on Friday. So we are doing it this Friday, but usually it is the first Friday of the month. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Nice to see you all, and have a great weekend. Bye.